I'm Cat Oriel, a breaking news reporter with Forbes. Today I'm here with Maryland State Delegate Joe Vogel. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So for those that might not be familiar with your background, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? What made you decide to get into politics?
Well, I'm a state legislator now representing the beautiful cities of Pittsburgh and Rockville in our General Assembly here. That's what we call our legislative office, because I look at the challenges of this moment in time, whether it's the gun violence epidemic, the climate crisis, the threats on our democracy, the attacks on our fundamental rights. I see this as a moment where the challenges that we're dealing with right now, the fights that are being waged right now, are going to have consequences for the rest of our lifetimes and for generations to come. So, I felt like I had no other choice but to step into the arena and fight for our future.
Did you always plan on making a run for Congress at this point in your life and career, or is it because Rep. David Trone has decided to make the step and run for Senator Ben Cardin's seat?
Well, it's really not even about the politics, right? I never thought that I'd even run for office. Growing up, I wanted to be a doctor when I was in high school, but then I saw the challenges of this moment in time, and I first really got involved in politics in any capacity, right? While I was in high school after the Sandy Hook shooting, because that was one of those moments when I saw children get gunned down in their classroom and expected government to do something, and I watched government do nothing. So I got involved in a state Senate race here with a candidate who had a bold gun violence platform. I never thought that 10 years later I'd be running for the state legislature myself, and never imagined that I'd one day run for the United States Congress. Look, my family immigrated here when I was 3 years old. I'm running to represent the same community that I grew up in, that welcomed me and my family with open arms here. So it really is an incredible opportunity, but more than anything, a tremendous honor.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the unique perspective that you would bring as a member of Congress. One of those perspectives being a member of Gen Z. If you were to be elected, you would only be the second, assuming no one else wins, member of Gen Z behind Representative Maxwell Frost. So can you talk to me a little bit about any criticism that you received, if any? You have held elected office and have experience working in politics so far, but has anyone given you pushback and said, you're too young, you lack experience, and what do you say to those critics?
Well, look, I've heard from the pundits and from the quote-unquote insiders who say that I should wait my turn. But the very reason that I'm running for Congress right now is because we've been waiting for way too long, and we just can't wait any longer, right? You look at these challenges that we're dealing with as a country, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it is the gun violence epidemic, the attacks on our democracy, the reversal of fundamental rights. And then you look at the challenges that people in my community are dealing with every single day. When I'm out around the district, I'm meeting with people who are desperate for rehabilitation beds, for recovery beds from their substance use, to deal with their substance use disorder. I'm meeting with kids who are terrified of going to school, knowing that their school could become the next to be targeted as with a mass shooting. I talk to seniors who are worried about Social Security and being able to afford their prescription medication. I talk to people all across the district who are desperate to get mental health care but don't have access to those resources. For all of those reasons, for all of those challenges that we're dealing with, we just can't afford to wait any longer. So that's why I decided to run for Congress, and I'll let the pundits and the insiders decide whether they think that's the right thing for me to do. But I'm running anyways, and we're going to win.
So you've touched a little bit about the topics that are most pressing to your constituents, to your potential constituents and fellow Marylanders, but is there one specific biggest threat that you find facing the state?
Well, I think the threat that's facing our country right now, and obviously as a result of that, facing our state as well, is the attack on democracy. And I take this issue very personally, not just as an American, but as someone the story of my family is a story of the reversal of democracy, the erosion of democracy. My great-grandparents, when they were younger than I was, fled Eastern Europe seeking refuge in Uruguay. They escaped fascism, where many of the members of their family would go on to die in the Holocaust. My grandparents and my parents grew up in Uruguay, right? That new home, the refuge that my great-grandparents had found. When my parents were young, there was a coup in Uruguay, and democracy in Uruguay eroded. And they became the second and third generation consecutively in my family to watch democracy erode, watch democracy fall apart. They spent 12 years, my parents and my grandparents, 12 years living under a military dictatorship. And here I am, the fourth generation in my family, to be watching the decline of democracy here in the United States of America, the country that my family immigrated to, watching democracy decline here in the country that I love. And we are not going to accept that. I will not be the fourth generation in my family to lose our democracy. But when I was in graduate school, I had a professor who had been an expert on the fall of Uruguayan democracy. She happened to be studying abroad there when there was a coup. And let me tell you, there aren't many experts on the fall of Uruguayan democracy. What she told me that really scares me, that terrifies me, and is part of the reason that I'm running for Congress, the same trends that she saw in Uruguay at the time of the collapse of democracy there are the same trends that she sees here in the United States of America. You have an authoritarian, fascist, far-right movement trying to undermine our democratic institutions and chip away at our fundamental rights. And then you have, another big part of the country looking at our democracy and saying, well, government's not doing anything for me. Government's not delivering for me. So what's the point in fighting for it? And when those two forces came together in Uruguay, it led to the fall of democracy there. And so we have a mission here, we have an obligation here, which is to fight back against the far-right, fascist, authoritarian movement, whatever you want to call it, and push back against their efforts to undermine our democracy and erode our fundamental rights, but also restore faith in democratic governance and show everyone, in particular young people, that democracy can still deliver for them.
Well, protecting democracy is not a small feat for the entire country, but especially one person. So how specifically do you think in your position would you be able to help do that, combating the erosion of democracy? And what would your other legislative priorities be as a member of Congress?
Look, the key to this is it's twofold, like I just said. One is being a brick wall against efforts to erode our democracy. Pushing back against attacks on voting rights and LGBTQ plus rights and reproductive rights that we're seeing all across the country right now at the state level. I believe Congress must codify abortion rights in the Constitution. In Maryland, we codify them in our Constitution. I think that Congress should pass a law codifying abortion rights. I think that we should pass the Equality Act and other protections for LGBTQ plus people. I think we should pass legislation to move forward with voting rights, securing voting rights in response to the attacks that we're seeing all across the country. And I think we have to take every measure possible to strengthen our democracy. But that's not enough, because the people that I'm talking to every day, right, look at me and look at the issues that we're talking about and say, well, why has nothing been done yet? Why has our democracy done so little on the challenges of our time? And you look at young people in particular, and poll after poll after poll shows that young people are growing more and more disillusioned, more and more hopeless with our government, and more hopeless about our future. And when we have that hopelessness and we have that growing disillusion, that's when people start to lose faith in our government, and that's really when we have a problem. So yes, we're gonna fight to restore our fundamental rights and fight to move our democracy forward and strengthen our democracy, but also just make government work again. And by making government work and showing people, that's been my mission in the state legislature. It's been working hard to deliver. We've delivered on mental health. I secured $5 million in funding to forgive the student debt of school psychologists, school social workers, to recruit and retain more mental health professionals in our public schools. We passed a major bill addressing the fentanyl overdose epidemic that we're seeing in our state, addressing the surge in hate crimes, modernizing our government's regulations, right, to keep up with the times. All of those issues demonstrate that government can still work, and those will be my priorities in Congress as well, taking on the mental health crisis that we see, in particular the mental health crisis that we see amongst young people, right? We saw a report recently that 1/3 of high school women in our country have considered or attempted suicide. We see astronomical, devastating rates of suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression amongst all young people. You look at marginalized groups and they're even more at risk, right? The opioid overdose epidemic, you go across my district and you see the consequence of a lack of investment in treatment, prevention, and recovery for those dealing with substance use disorder. And we have a lot of work to do on those two fronts, and those will continue to be my two top priorities in Congress.
So how have you been engaging with Gen Z and young voters to show them the strength in democracy and empower them to use their voice? Has it been easy? Because I know that your district that you hope to represent in Congress kind of does sway a little bit older. So have you been meeting a lot of Gen Z voters out there?
Well, the key is this. I don't think it's just Gen Zers that are excited about a Gen Z candidate. I think it's everyone that's looked at our government and our politics and said, enough. The status quo is not working for me. And that's the message of this campaign. It's the status quo is not working for anyone. And the promise of a new generation of leaders, a generation that's going to bring greater urgency to the challenges of our time and deliver results, that's something that inspires and excites all people. And we're seeing that right on the campaign trail. The number of people of all ages that are coming up to me and saying, wow, you are the promise of a new generation. We are excited about your campaign. And obviously, young people are uniquely excited about the prospects of having someone that understands their issues firsthand, representing them in Congress. We built an exciting grassroots campaign when I was running for the state legislature here, built of people of all ages, but in particular young people who are out there every single day, knocking on doors, making those phone calls, sending those text messages, building this campaign from the ground up. That's exactly what we're doing again in this campaign for Congress.
And so you've touched on it a little bit, but what advice do you have for anyone, Gen Z, young, or even if they're older and, more advanced in their career, they want to get into public office? What advice do you have for them?
Just run. Look, generations to come will look at this moment in time and will think about our generation and wonder whether we did enough. And this is the moment in time for us to step into the arena, whether it's running for office, getting involved in a campaign, at the very least voting, right, being a part of our democracy. Because if we do not believe in this democracy, if we do not believe in our future, if we don't fight for our future and take on these challenges, we will inherit the world that has to deal with the effects of these threats, right? You go outside today and it's smoky, right? Your eyes sting a little bit. You feel the smoke in your lungs. That is what our future will look like if we don't deal with the climate crisis. I know firsthand what it's like to sit in a classroom in the dark, on the floor, with the door locked, blinds down, practicing those school shooting drills. I don't want future generations to have to go through what we went through, right? I don't want future generations to have to deal with living in a country where they don't have bodily autonomy, where the government is telling them what books they're allowed to read, what gender they're allowed to be, what sexual orientation they're allowed to talk about in their school, right? That is not the future that we believe in. But if we want to secure a better future, if we want to secure a more just, more equal, more progressive future, then this is the moment to fight for it.
Well, that's the end of my questions. Do you have anything else to add that we haven't touched on so far?
No, this was fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and good luck on your election.